the long Polish last names are pretty commonplace around here. Welcome everybody. Thank you all for being here this almost said morning, this afternoon. I'm Jason Jakubowski. I'm the president and CEO of Connecticut Foodshare, and very happy to host this roundtable along with my very good friends over at End Hunger Connecticut. And Juliet, why don't you say hello?
Good afternoon. My name is Juliet Callejas, Executive Director of End Hunger Connecticut. We are a statewide policy advocacy nonprofit. Our area of resources SNAP, food security, and child nutrition.
So we do a lot of work together. Actually, Juliet and I were just down in D.C. a couple of weeks ago with advocates from all across the entire country, talking about the Farm Bill, talking about SNAP, TFAP, all sorts of important nutritional things that are going to impact people here in this country for the next 5 years. And I think that's one of the important things to keep in mind as we have this discussion today. We are hopeful that we are very supportive of a robust farm bill, but also a bipartisan farm bill. It has always been and that's one of the things that Juliet and I were talking about down in DC. It has always been a bipartisan effort every 5 years, and we're very hopeful that that happens again. We're very thankful that the Congresswoman has chosen to come out here and listen, quite frankly, to the experts around the table in terms of what these impacts could be over the next 5 years with the Farm Bill. Before we start, I do want to make sure I introduce our very gracious host, Dr. Zulma Toro, the president of CCSU. In addition to being the president and CEO of Connecticut Foodshare, for the last 17 years, I've been on the faculty here at CCSU in the political science department right next door. And it's a wonderful place, and I enjoy every minute of teaching here. So she's also my boss, so we all have to be on our best behavior. Dr. Toro.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to Central. Congresswoman Hayes, as you know, this is home for you. Our friends from Connecticut Food Bank and End Hunger Connecticut, along with honored guests, both here in the room and to those watching online. I was told that we are broadcasting this. We may or may not, but at least we are recording it, which is good. Thank you. Thank you for reaching out to Central to provide us the opportunity to host this event. This is part of who we are as an institution of higher education, and this is part of our mission, collaborating with the community, with elected officials in addressing the important topics for our community. So thank you for that opportunity. In preparation for today's discussion on the Federal Farm Bill, I learned some very interesting facts that I thought I needed to share with you. The U.S. Department of Agriculture reports our state has more than 5,500 farms that stretch over 381,000 acres. That is amazing, amazing for a state like Connecticut. But more than that, you are also going to talk about nutrition assistance. We here at Central host Maria's Place, a free food pantry for our students, faculty, and staff in memory of a long-time staff member. And thanks to our generous community, we continue to serve those in need. Let me tell you that every year we do survey of our students. Believe it or not, at least 49% of our students have reported food insecurity. People may not believe that, but in the middle of Connecticut, state that is supposed to be so wealthy, we are facing that challenge. And in many instances, students cannot finish a degree with us because they food and in other instances, housing insecurity they face. So I am sure that this afternoon, diverse voices who are sit around the table will be heard, and you will be sharing a lot of information and ideas and recommendations about this very important topic. I know it will be a very rich discussion. And I again thank you for selecting Central to host the event. And I may have to excuse myself because I have another meeting. Believe it or not, it's Friday afternoon, but we continue to work on. So with that, again, enjoy the roundtable.
Thank you for your hospitality, President Toro. We really appreciate it. I also want to introduce the gentleman to my right. Juliet and I have a great friend in the Commissioner of Agriculture. I always say he's the best Commissioner of Agriculture in the country. Admittedly, I don't know the other 49, but he is, Congresswoman. I'm going to introduce Commissioner Brian Holbrook. Brian, thanks for being out here with us today. Brian was at Capitol Lunch before this. For all of you from there, you go, all the New Britain folks here, you get it. All right.
I'm glad this is being live streamed. So, is there anything else you want to?
No.
Well, thank you, Jason, Juliet, for being here, Congresswoman Hayes, for your attention to these very important issues, and Dr. Toro for hosting this important conversation. We at the Department of Agriculture recognize how important our farmers are in the food security challenges that are facing our state. We've done a number of things on our own, working with End Hunger and Foodshare and a number of other pantries across the state to increase access and affordability to Connecticut-grown products. Made some investments with some federal dollars that came in during the pandemic to really assist and make sure that not only are we helping those families that need access to food, but we're helping those farmers that employ 22,000 people in our state, and as Dr. Toro mentioned, work 370,000 acres of land. And so it's a spiral upward when we make investments in food security across the state. The local food purchase agreement, the farm to school programming, farmers market nutrition programs, SNAP doubling, all of those are reaching both sides of the farm to plate spectrum. And this is an opportunity at this Farm Bill conversation to make permanent investments to continue to strengthen that relationship for the foreseeable future. And again, happy to be here and so thankful that all of you took time out of your Friday afternoons to share your expertise and knowledge and thoughts on this as we move forward. So thank you, Jason.
Great. Thank you very much, Commissioner. Well, without further ado, we want to introduce the Congresswoman. Very happy that you're here in New Britain. I will say this, and many of you here do know my dad. My dad is not the easiest judge of character, or is a very difficult judge of character. He's a very good judge. He's a very good judge of character, but he does not heap praise upon people very easily. And I'll never forget a couple of years ago, and he told me, he's like, I met at New Britain Diner with Jahana Hayes, and I'm supporting her for Congress. I said, okay, Dad. I was like, that's great. She's a teacher. She's like me. She cares about us. She cares about the inner city. She cares about our kids. And it was one of those things like, okay, maybe she wins, maybe she doesn't win, or anything like that. Obviously, she won. My father has not let anybody forget that, by the way, ever since. But we have had a great relationship with Jahana Hayes here in Connecticut, at both Connecticut Foodshare and End Hunger Connecticut. We often talk about a lot of these national issues, like what we're talking about here today. We don't have to worry about this particular Congresswoman. She's on the Agriculture Committee. She is a national leader in the fight for inclusion in school lunches. She is somebody who knows not only her district, but knows the state of Connecticut and knows this country and knows what people what people need. And we're very happy to have her here with us today to talk a little bit and then to open it up for some questions and dialogue. I think she wants to hear from you But first, we want to hear from the great Congresswoman from the 5th District, Jahana Hayes. Go ahead, Congresswoman.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here. I absolutely want to hear from you, but I just need to take a few minutes because this issue is so deeply personal to me. I need for you to know that this room gives me life because this has been a #1 issue for me for a very long time. I want to thank State Representative Eleni Kavros DeGraw for being here, for making the trek to New Britain to join us. Because
You said it right. You did. No, I just want to point out, you said it right.
I'm no fool.
All right, okay.
I was at the Polish festival.
Okay, all right, there you go.
Someone says to me, "You have on an amber necklace." I was like, "I always do my homework." I digress. When I initially got elected and went to Congress, everyone expected that I would be on the Education and Labor Committee. It's my thing. I'm a teacher. My second committee choice on purpose was ag. And no one could understand that. And some of my Democratic colleagues were like, "I don't get it." You know. I said, "What don't you get?" "Well, you know." "No, actually I don't." "You're a black girl from the city. What do you know about farming?" I says, "Well, every member of Congress may not represent a farming community," of which I do, by the way. Every member of Congress represents people who eat. And that has to be a part of this conversation. And as a teacher, I cannot tell you what it means when you come into a classroom on a Monday morning after a long weekend and a kid has their head on the desk because the last good meal they had was at school. Hungry kids don't learn, and someone on this committee has to say that. So I have been literally just plugged into this committee because the Farm Bill really does not acknowledge the whole nutrition space in all of this legislation. It is a $1.4 trillion piece of legislation. The biggest thing that we will pass in this Congress, reauthorized every 5 years, 76% of that is allocated to nutrition. So we are talking mandatory spending on that affects a lot of people. I have also, not only during my time as Teacher of the Year, but during my time in Congress, traveled abroad and looked at the work of Save the Children, the CARE Network, USAID, the McGovern-Dole Food Program. And you realize that food is also a national security issue. There are so many people who rely heavily on the United States as partners to be committed in the work to end hunger. Last Congress, I became the chairperson of the Nutrition Oversight Subcommittee because this is that important to me. And I have been literally sounding the alarm since then about we have to pay closer attention to this. In that Congress, you all know the pandemic hit. And what I learned very quickly was, wait, we have the ability to do this. We had a hearing right at the beginning of the Congress as schools were closing. I literally, before we left caucus, I remember saying to the speaker, wait, we can't leave. If we're talking about closing schools, how will we feed these children? And it was fascinating to me that after I said it, my colleagues realized, oh wait, the federal government says that you can't take school lunches from congregate settings. I was like, this is your rule, you don't know it? Like, I know it because I used to have to steal sandwiches to give to the kids that played basketball after school before the lunch lady threw them away, because she said, I cannot give these to kids to take off of school grounds. So we went back and we changed the legislation. We had to expand SNAP so that kids who were going to be out of school now and home all day, their parents had the resources to feed them. We had to expand the program to provide emergency allotments, and because it was all already online, 11 days after that initial meeting, people got those benefits on their cards. And what that said to me was, wait, we have the ability and the capacity to do this. What we lack is the will. People just don't care enough about these programs. Or, which was even more deeply disturbing, people don't understand or appreciate or give dignity and value to the people who are on the receiving ends of these programs. I have been very vocal and outspoken on committee, as the chairperson, as a member of Congress, about the fact that as a single mom, working 2 jobs, going to school full-time, I collected food stamps. I worked 2 jobs and still was eligible. We have so many people who are working poor, so all of these conversations about work requirements in order to collect SNAP, 4 out of 5 households that receive benefits already have an adult who is working. Doesn't matter if you're working if you're not making a living wage, with inflation going up in every other area of your life. But at the end of the day, we can talk about the data, we can talk about statistics, we can talk about what that means. I just fundamentally believe that everybody deserves to eat. We're talking about $6 per person per day when we get down to SNAP benefits. One of the questions I asked last week as we were going back and forth, I says, well, if there is talk of cutting individual benefits, does that mean that we are going to increase resources that go to food banks or community partners or churches? Because don't we all agree that these people still should eat? And the answer was no. I introduced Student School Food Security Act because I know too many kids who, once they pay for their tuition, they don't have money for a meal plan. I see too many colleges, universities, community colleges operating food banks that students are accessing. I see too many students who are starting early and going late into the evening having only had a granola bar or a Gatorade. We have the ability to do this. We don't have to trade off one marginalized group for another. We can feed everybody. When I said this room gives me life, you have to imagine that last week was a very, very, very difficult week for me. We were engaged in negotiations over raising the debt ceiling, which it is not lost on me how important that is. I knew that this was something that we had to do. I knew that the full faith and credit of the United States government could not be held hostage, and we didn't have a choice but to raise this. But I have to tell you, I was so incredibly disappointed to know that what was bargained was food. To see that our military budget was being raised even more than both the DOD and the president had even asked for, and the trade-off was cuts to SNAP, cuts to food programs. That just did not sit well with me because it has been on the horizon, it has been the center of conversation, and I recognize that it is only the beginning, which is why this is so incredibly important. I voted no on the debt ceiling, and I tell you, I struggled. I was up, I prayed about it, I called my pastor, I called my bishop, I called everyone I know, I called all the advocates, and people were like, this is too important, I get it, but we live to fight another day. And I says, but why is it that every time that we have to have any conversation about debt and deficit, the people who shoulder that are the poorest, most vulnerable people? We have to do things differently. No conversation about closing some of the tax loopholes, no conversation about the DOD, who can't account for 60% of their $3.5 trillion in assets and have failed 5 audits in a row, literally. But this program, food security programs, which will save $50 million, which is not even a drop in the bucket of the $31 trillion deficit that we're trying to address, we have to have different conversations. So I am still optimistic because the chair of the Ag Committee, the full committee chair, G.T. Thompson, cares about these things, and he cares about the Farm Bill, and it has been historically bipartisan, and I think that there will be room for us to make some compromises and come to a place of consensus. But we have to have a Farm Bill that is more equitable, that addresses the needs of small and family farmers, that creates a marketplace for our schools and communities as vendors. You know, one of the things that we saw during the pandemic, we tried to get these farm to families food boxes out quickly, and I was shocked when I saw that only one Connecticut farmer had even gotten a contract. It was large corporate farmers. It was entertainment venues from across the country who were shipping. I don't need you to ship apples to Connecticut from the Midwest. I can go find you some apples in Connecticut. So really just being more creative and reaching out to our partners. I hear from Connecticut farmers all the time about how they want climate-smart agriculture, drought-resistant seeds. They want to transition. They just need the capital to be able to do these things that they're doing on their own. But at the end of the day, the line for me is food. And people say to me, it really is not that basic, Jahana. And I said, except that it is. Yeah. I can tell you, during this vote series, everyone is watching the board. And I hadn't talked to anybody because I wasn't trying to get anyone else to change their vote. We had got over 300. I knew that the debt ceiling was going to be raised and it was going to be passed. I fully appreciate I'm trying to find another way to say the pain in the ass that this will cause me moving forward. I fully appreciate that I literally just put a target on myself by taking this vote, but we have to have this conversation. I put my card in the machine and I voted. And Nancy Pelosi came over to me and she said, sweetie, what are you doing? She says, is it worth it? And I looked at her and I said, Madam Speaker, because she's Nancy Pelosi. I said, what you need to understand is that would have been me. I would have been one of the people that we are voting against right now. And this cannot be the solution to this problem over and over again. And she said, do what you need to do. Right after she came over, Jim Clyburn turned to me and he said, unless you know something different about Connecticut than I know. I said, yeah, it's the same district, and he was like, what are you doing? And I said, this is my issue. And I have to tell you, I didn't know that this would be my issue. I had a list of, when I met with your dad at the diner, these are all the things I want to go to Congress to talk about and do, and most of those things are about education and, my community and opportunities for people, and I really didn't know I'd have to fight this hard for food. But I can tell you, I have literally watched this evolve, and it's not over. It's not over. The pandemic showed us how the fragility of our food systems. Last Congress, I was able to secure with Jim McGovern $50 million for a White House conference on hunger, and it was amazing because this was the first time in 50 years that this had happened. The last time it was convened, Shirley Chisholm convened it, and that's how we got the WIC program. So for educators and nutritionists and pediatricians and faith-based leaders and all of these, scholars and experts to come together and say, how do we address this issue from a multifaceted approach? Because this is something that you guys do every day. This is your real life, but this isn't your problem alone. This is all of our problems. So we have to think about it from the academic perspective, from the medical perspective, from the community outreach, everything. Everybody has a stake in the game when it comes to this, and we have to help people to understand and appreciate that it is your problem too. So I just thank you all for being here. I look forward to hearing from you. Sometimes I have to do a gut check because this work is not about me, and you cannot be a congressperson and be so egocentric that you only think about the things that affect you. And while this has personally affected me, I also, having been in a classroom for 15 years, saw how it affected kids and their families and people in this community, and it is just one of those things that it is too close to my heart to take my foot off the gas on it. And I used to say to my students, buckle up, buttercup, when we were going into exam. So I say that to you all today because last week's conversations were not the end of the challenge here. We had our first hearing on the nutrition subcommittee, and the way that assistance was framed, the way that some of these programs were framed is just wrong. It's just flawed. So it really is going to take public sentiment and outside groups and the people who are on the ground and have these stories to share and see, meet people where they are and look in their eyes and know that they are doing the best that they can. And they just want to feed their kids. I'm going to need your help with this. So, all of that was in here. It's just hard to sit and listen. We had our hearing this week, and it was 7 hours of all of the stories, and I was like, those are the exceptions, but overwhelmingly, that is not how this works. So, to know that, like me, there are still people who believe in people and think that you stand in intercession for people until they can stand on their own, and you help them, and then they turn around and help the person behind them, and you support communities, and this is what we've all done, and we've all been on the receiving end of something at some point. So it is going to be a long session, and this is going to be, if I were to say there were 3 issues that will keep coming back to the forefront, this is one of them. You saw it in the debt ceiling, we're going to see it in the Farm Bill, and we're going to see it in all 12 appropriations packages that we negotiate. And what I will not, and it's going to be even harder because all of these packages have caps now on spending, and I know how these caps work. You fund everything at the top, and by the time you get to the bottom of the list, it is the poorest, most marginalized communities. It is the outreach programs. It is the programs that address hunger and homelessness and addiction and all of those things, and that's where the cuts start happening. So you guys are really, 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 this is your recital. You practice, you do all the work behind the scenes. This is where you really have to get out front on this issue and frame the discussions about what hunger looks like and why it's so important that we don't let this problem get any worse. Thank you.
So as we go along and open the doors for discussions, please introduce yourself, your organization, and who you're representing. So as Congressman stated, we have compromised the debt ceiling agreements. So one of the questions that comes to the Congressman or to the group provided, we know that it is divided and we have compromise. What is important, and what are some of the harmful compromises that we have to deal with this bill? What are the things that we are giving up? What are the things that we had to battle? And what are the things that we had to push as advocates?
Well, there were some good things in the bill, and those things happened as a result of public pressure. So we were able to protect homeless populations and veterans, which those are good things. But it was very clear to me that there wasn't a true appreciation for what that means, because just because we wrote into legislation that we will make homeless populations or housing insecure populations eligible, we also have to go a step further and say, what does eligibility look like? Because if you have to present a social security card and a birth certificate and all of these documents, then those people still won't access these programs. So we really have to kind of walk it all the way through. Work requirements were extended from age 49 to 56, which I don't have a problem with work. I want people to work. People should have opportunities to work, but they are so stringent, and the administrative and paperwork requirements are so burdensome that they'll actually cost states more to administer the programs than they're saving. One of the things that I was disappointed, one of the compromises was students. So the way the bill was written, work requirements means 20 hours of work a week and does not include full-time school. So we have so many young people who are in school full-time doing the best they can, and if they don't have dependents, they wouldn't qualify under the way this program is currently written. My thing is, we don't have to trade off one group for another. It's like, yes, it was a win that we were able to include veterans because that community was just outraged and the public sentiment, But it frames it as if anyone else who receives any kind of food assistance is just lazy and doesn't want to work, and that is just not true. And the thing that I am most afraid of is that I know this is just the beginning. There is currently legislation from one of my Republican colleagues that would cut off assistance. Right now, if you have dependents, that's kind of protected, but over the age of 7. So if you have kids over 7, you would be ineligible. What are we supposed to do? 7-year-olds have to go to work? I really don't understand it. And the thing is, we also have to make sure that we are reevaluating the Thrifty Food Plan, because right now it's based on the cost to prepare foods, and it's at about $2 per person per meal, so $6 a day. I don't know where you can eat for $6 a day, but it also accounts for all of this preparation time. You can't buy hot foods, and my colleagues were talking about like it's a luxury. I was like, but if you are homeless and you don't have a place to store or cook food, what are you supposed to open a soup can with your teeth? And I don't understand. Like, you're really, it's there's such an archaic understanding of how these programs work, and people should not have to feel like they're losing their dignity because they require food assistance. Like, the level of explanation that is required, and you know, I try to help my colleagues understand it. This is the only group that this level of scrutiny is on. You know, there was no argument at the beginning of the pandemic when we had to do payroll protection to save our small businesses. It was like, no, the businesses need help. You know, we cannot leave them out there on their own. But when we had to do pandemic EBT, it was, I mean, and that has been snatched away, so that has ended. So benefit levels have dropped by about $98. So a single person receives about $120 a month on average. It's not a lot of money that we're talking about. And then just finally, what I'll say about that one is with the emergency allotments gone, we saw people got, for the first time, people on Social Security got for the first time a cost of living increase this year. It immediately offset their food benefits. So they got
Yes.
$71 more in Social Security, but then they lost $150 in food stamps. It just really, it doesn't make sense. So we don't have to keep trading off one group for another. And I want a farm bill that acknowledges that we are the wealthiest country in the world. We make conscious choices and decisions, and our budgets are a statement of our values, and our values should be that we want to feed our citizens. That was another thing. See, I keep thinking of stuff. You gotta jump in quick. Because that's another thing that is gonna be a topic of discussion. Citizenship and immigration status. It came up, so many of my colleagues, this was their only question. Currently, if you have to have a Social Security number to collect benefits, so the only people who collect SNAP benefits are U.S. citizens. Asylum seekers are eligible for benefits, but they are not undocumented at that point. They are already in the system. They're not a pending application, but at the point of process, which takes about 4.5 years. So there are people who are not U.S. citizens or permanent residents who are asylum seekers who can access benefits, but the data shows that no American is losing benefits because they're going to someone who is undocumented. But at the end of the day, is it that serious? But that is going to be something that we're going to hear over and over and over again. And if there is something that these groups can do, because those people will not come out of the shadows and fight and share their stories and talk about it because they just want to work and keep their heads down and do what they have to do. So it is going to be incumbent upon the people who do have the agency and the advocacy to correct the record on those things, because this group of people is attacked over and over and over again as if they made these dangerous treks and risked everything and uprooted their kids and their lives and left the only home they know to come here and defraud the United States government out of $128 a month in food stamps.
Thank you.
Jump right in, because this is, I'm living this every day, so I am living this.
Marlo will jump.
I have like pages worth already. I'm Dr. Marlo Grappone. I'm the Executive Director of HR of New Britain. We are the community action agency that serves New Britain, Bristol, Burlington, Farmington, Plymouth, Plainville. We have an array of services, but one of our largest programs is the New Britain Food and Resource Center, that we're very blessed to have a strong partnership with Connecticut Foodshare to deliver. And everything that you speak to is, like, of course, resonating with me as well. I too am someone that shares history, and every facet and every argument has a layer to it that adds more complexity and more barriers, and that's equity and inclusion. And so when you're thinking about the intersectional impact on people from Black and brown populations and these very issues, it goes even deeper, you know? So when we're talking about this last one that you brought up, because I am a Latina, but I'm blessed to be Puerto Rican, we don't have the same issues, but we feel the same pain because we care about our brothers and sisters in the Latino community. And unfortunately, when you think of asylum seeking, I don't think it's a secret that when it comes to people coming to our country from Hispanic countries, our asylum seeking is not as easily accepted from when they're in trouble. But, you know, when it's people from Caucasian countries, asylum seeking is something that is well accepted and supported and embraced. So I don't say this to be negative, in that people who need help need help.
Right.
And food is the one place where it's supposed to be an equalizer. But I just wanted to bring to attention that it's not an equalizer. On top of it, we're a huge provider of early childhood education. So you're talking about education, and I'm saying, wow, expectant mothers and young children who are directly impacted by the lack of food and nutrition is a direct link to the growth and development of the children, a direct link to the infant mortality rate that we experience in our community. You know, so again, when you look at the high rates of teenage pregnancy and not being able to support students who might be looking to receive SNAP, you know, or also people who are doubled up and living and sharing expenses because the housing situation is now, of course, layering on top of their food needs. We're very worried. We're very, very worried for the people that are crossing our doors, because the resources that we have are absolutely not sufficient to even begin to scratch the surface of what they need. These are systemic issues. These are things that need to be addressed by a higher power and higher entities than what we can bring. But I can tell you that we don't stop.
I appreciate that. A couple things. So you're absolutely right how people who present themselves for help to this country are treated differently. I was so proud of the state of Connecticut at the height of the Ukrainian crisis, where we said we are a state that welcomes refugees and opened our doors. But I've also seen in other areas of conflict, we saw with Haiti, we see, you know, in Spanish-speaking countries all over the world where refugees are not welcomed with open arms in the same way. In this district, I have 41 towns, and I can tell you that I am one of the members of Congress with the largest equity and education gap. I don't know if you saw the NBC report that said Connecticut was one of the worst states when it came to racial disparities in education, and I thought I was sick over it. But I get it. I represent more exclusive boarding schools in one district than any other member in the Congress. I have Ethel Walker, I have Taft, I have the Gunnery, I have the Hotchkiss School. I can, all the emblems, whenever a member of Congress says, oh, I know your district, it's because their kid went to Taft or went to,
Avon
I was like,
Farms.
Avon Old Farms. I was like, yeah, it's all different. I also, in this same district, have 4 of the schools on the Commissioners Network of Failing Schools for Title I school districts. So in one district, I represent both of those communities. What I will say, though, about this issue, the issue of hunger, people generally don't care about something until it gets to them.
Mhm.
And what has happened over the last couple of years is that it's not just black and brown communities. It's not just the cities. There's a reason Aletti's sitting here. I've seen Foodshare Connecticut, when they were handing out boxes at the height of the pandemic, a whole lot of luxury cars in that line. So this is doctors, like people who literally, for the first time in their lives, are displaced, are in a space that they really don't know how to navigate, and are just so humbled because this is their last option. The last thing they want to do is be in a line at Foodshare getting fresh produce. And we saw that. And I think what it has done is really softened hearts and minds, and people are talking about these things different. This is not just a liberal left, altruistic do-gooders who, no, this is not suburban white women who want to volunteer at food banks. This is people who are deeply and personally affected, who are like, oh wait, I got to be a part of the solution moving forward. And I think that provides an opportunity, because it cannot just be black and brown communities, immigrant communities, marginalized people saying we have to do this. It has to be everybody.
Mhm.
Everybody making the case for why this is important. And I think what we've seen, I see it with small farmers, I see it with just everybody throughout the state are like, wait, no, we got to do something about this. We wouldn't be having, 4 years ago, you guys do it because you live this, but in the legislative space, the buzz and the movement and the activity around food security, around programs like SNAP, around GusSNP, around healthy food options is just so different. One of the witnesses in our committee last week was talking about how people in these communities make poor choices and they have poor health and all they buy is sugary drinks and blah, 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 blah. And I says, let me tell you something. I showed her the radius of, I have an apartment in DC, and in the place where I live that's right next to the Capitol, there are 9 grocery stores. You go right over the river, into the hood, one store. Sharice Davids talked about how the closest grocery store from the reservation that she used to live on was 31 minutes. But they didn't carry meat because they didn't have the USDA, and so they couldn't pass the USDA inspection for that. So I don't know if I want to buy groceries from a place that can't pass USDA inspection, but that's a whole nother story for a whole nother time. The next one, she said, was like 45 minutes away, and the Super Walmart was 98 minutes from the reservation. So when you're talking to people who are trying to just find the last tomato at the bodega, then how are you lecturing them on healthy food choices? So part of it, it's all the things. It is redlining. It is geographically placing people in communities that don't have access to healthy foods. It's all of those things that have to be a part of any conversation we have moving forward about food. And it's not just, and I'm happy to some degree that we are no longer just talking about black and brown communities. Rural communities. The number of people in the northwest corner of Connecticut that everybody thinks is a New York weekender, the people who live there full time are struggling. They live there and they work for all of these people. They can't afford these rents. They can't afford, the rising inflationary costs. And they are saying to me, Congresswoman, I need help. And I'm like, it was humbling for me because I was like, up here too? It's everywhere.
I would love to just dovetail on
Please.
that from the state perspective, because to the black maternal health, if it was white maternal health, that would be solved already.
The worst in the world.
Right, worst in the world, right? But also, when you're saying about these communities that are advocating, I'm just outside of that northwest corner, and I have to say, I've never seen the advocacy from people in Canton the way that I did this time about making the school lunches free forever, because obviously we had them during the pandemic. And we do have some money left over, and that money is going to be going to, I believe it's 200% in terms of, you know,
Correct.
that's, but it should be all kids, because that way there's no stigma, and if everybody's getting it, then you don't know who is getting it, right? So, but the conversations are changing, and I was as an employee, was at Foodshare when those lines were happening. And when like you, I've advocated for food literally my entire life. I just found a newspaper clipping from working with a Coalition for Creative Nonviolence outside of DC when I was in 8th grade. And Dr. Harold Moss showed up and to accept his check, and I think the head of the school was a little surprised. But it was, I have seen how this conversation has changed. I will correct my former boss and say, yes, this used to be bipartisan. And I say that because right around the time Paul Ryan was in Congress, and I hate to say that because I have a lot of Republican colleagues that I know care deeply about this, but I know that around the time Paul Ryan was in Congress, that was when the conversation changed, and we started talking about people getting iPhones or whatever the phone was at the time on, these dollars and things that went along with that, the old welfare queen narrative, which is absolutely ridiculous and obscene. Thank you, Ronald Reagan. And so that narrative has changed, and to the point that we are responsible for changing it, both those of us who have a larger platform, those of us who have different kinds of platforms. I'm glad to hear that the conversation is changing, but when I was at Foodshare, in those lines, working those lines, putting food in cars, and then I had to go out in the community and solicit the community dollars because I was part of the development team, I used to be able to say, oh, picture a little kid coming into school and putting their head down. And after that experience of 1,500 cars a day, it was close your eyes for me and picture, and then I would say, black, white, Christian, Muslim, doctor, lawyer, nurse, business owner, able-bodied, disabled. It was, you name it, they were in that line, day after day after day. 3 hours, some days, yes, 3 hours felt like not enough. In the blazing heat of the summer, our shoes were practically melting into the asphalt. So it's those experiences that people have now, because I think at the time we worried, oh, they're going to be in this line and then they're going to leave and they're never going to think about this again. And we do see people who come back and want to give, but beyond wanting to give, they will say that experience was a lifeline for them. And the more people who look like me that can say that experience was a lifeline for them, that's what changes the conversation. Mm-hmm. When we talk about what it means to be an ally, you have to, it used to be you don't have to have the experience to be able to talk about the experience and say we need to do better. But those people in that situation, having had that experience, are now some of the best proselytizers about what this is. The fact that we can't agree on people needing to be fed tells you a lot about where our country is. Mm-hmm. The fact that we live in the richest state in the nation, and yet we have the greatest disparity. It's horrifying, frankly. And to the extent that we at the state capitol can assist and continue to assist in this conversation, there are many, many, many of us who kept going into the speaker's office and saying, not enough, more, not enough. And there's some frustration with how some of the conversations were turned in the opposite direction. So I think you're going to see some changes there too. But we are so grateful to all of you who are in the communities, who are doing that daily work. And as the Congresswoman said, but we still need you. We need you to help keep shaping this conversation, because we're still at not enough. We're just still at not enough.
I'll just add to that, Eleni, that people talk about how the Farm Bill has always been bipartisan, and it has been. However, in the last Farm Bill, the issue that was on the table was able-bodied without dependents and SNAP. So yes, it was a bipartisan compromise, but every single time the compromise is feeding people, addressing the needs of the lowest income people in this country, people who have different challenges. So yeah, I want it to be bipartisan, but we need to legislate differently, because just because a consensus was made doesn't mean that it's something that I would support or that any of us should support. Yes, we got it done, but our asks have to be different. Our outcomes have to be different. I was thinking about, you brought up ABOTs, able-bodied work people without dependents, and there's so many variables that aren't even factored in. People with mental health issues. You know, I was thinking of, and I don't know why this keeps sticking in my head, the young man on the subway in New York that was killed. And his aunt kept talking about him having undiagnosed mental health issues after seeing his mother murdered. And he was 31, no children, you know, would sing on the subway, whatever. And under the legislation that was just passed, he is someone who would not receive food assistance. I don't know if this makes me a bad congresswoman, but I think he deserves to eat too. Like, I think he deserves it because people are like, well, you should be. And it's like people have different situations. And now with health and mental health and pre-existing conditions and all of these other things, like to your first question, what were some of the things that are taken away? One of the things that I think is most harmful is the ability for states to offer exemptions and flexibilities. Because the state on the ground should be able to look at what is going on and make those decisions. If we have a storm, or there is, you know, a factory closes or leaves, or there's something hyper local that will affect the people of the state that is not a DC issue or a national issue, the governor, the state representatives, you know, the advocate should be able to say, wait a minute, Connecticut is experiencing some trouble here. I just signed on to a letter with the frost. People going crazy because we had, you guys just thought this is a day where we gotta close our windows because it's a little bit chilly. All my farmers went crazy. No, this is freezing my tomatoes. Like, so literally it requires federal intervention. So there needs to be the ability to say, this is what this did, this is what this means locally, and this is how we're affected. But if all of that ability is taken away, if a state agency, most of the employers, you know, the state employs so many people. If Stanley Black & Decker says, think about all of the people who have these hyper-local jobs where everybody in the community works at the same place, where if something happened to that one business, it's going to have a ripple effect to every family there. The state and the state reps and our legislature should be able to say, we're declaring our own emergency or offering 12% flexibility for these populations that are the most affected, and this takes that away. But there's a through line in all of this. It is to dehumanize the people who access these programs.
That
That part.
part. And the quiet part out loud all the time is, and even at our state government, because I hear it in rooms that I would not expect. I hear it frequently. I mean, I just got in 21. We've been having the Husky conversation for undocumented folks and trying to incrementally raise it every year, a couple years. These children are in school next to all of our children. What are we talking about? What are we talking about? But they don't deserve medical care? It's the same as the food argument.
Dan, you got something?
I do, thank you. Good afternoon, Dan Giacomi. I'm the Connecticut SNAP Director at the Department of Social Services. So as the individual
A lot of
here,
paperwork.
a lot of paperwork representing, over 800 staff members that are actually taking the applications and determining the eligibility day in and day out. It really resonates with me, everything that you're saying, and how difficult it is for my staff members to determine whether an individual qualifies for one of those exemptions that we talked about. It's very difficult, if you think about it tangibly, to be on a telephone doing an interview and trying to determine whether this individual is fit for work. You don't see them, you're not face to face with them, you're not going through their entire life story, undiagnosed mental illness, or what's going on in their life. You're very difficult to figure that out. Even with some of these other exemptions that we've talked about, it's not necessarily something that we require an individual to identify themselves as being a veteran when they come in to apply for benefits. Unless they voluntarily provide that information to us, we may never know that that individual is a veteran of the United States who does qualify for that. So I think or perhaps what my question to you, Congresswoman, would be, and thank you very much for the fight that you do, and I had the pleasure of testifying at the previous NODO hearing, and just seeing you pull out your fact sheet when they started talking about asylees and undocumented immigrants was very satisfying for me, because I was turning very red in the face. But I guess my question would be is what's your thoughts on, when we talk about veterans, we know that the VA knows who's a veteran in the state of Connecticut. And they have that information in a file that could be transmitted. So how can we, on the state level, but also through legislation, look to streamline that information that comes from our federal partners to the state agencies to lessen the burden upon our individuals that are applying or that are receiving benefits, but also our workers that are trying to figure out the best way to identify these exemptions and ensure that these individuals don't lose out on their benefits.
This bill does nothing to address that. Federal agencies don't even communicate with federal agencies. One of the things that I saw was when I introduced legislation to close the college hunger gap, I said, we already have this information. When students apply for FAFSA, we can use that same information with USDA to apply for SNAP. The two don't communicate with each other. We have SNAP information that does not go to our school districts, or WIC information that's not transferred. It's so incredibly egregious. I worked with the VA, and when we were talking about legalized cannabis, where people could have a prescription from a doctor at the state level, but could get kicked off of their VA benefits because it is not on the it is. None of these agencies talk to each other. So to your point, you're trying to navigate this complex web, and in a state like Connecticut, I mean in DC, it's less advantageous for me to have a car because you can get around the city quicker without a vehicle. There's so much public transportation. You have the metro, you can get a scooter, you can get a bike, you get an Uber. It's a walkable city. In Connecticut, to your point, when you look at the barriers to employment, if you find someone a job and they can't get there, then it's not really a job. Right. If your hours are changed, and I know this when my daughter got a job at Quasi, and every time there was a drop of rain that fell, she was like, they told me to go home. I was like, well, I'm already home. I guess you're going to just be volunteering. I just dropped you off. What are you talking about? They said it's going to get cloudy or it's snow. Somebody here has a child that worked at Quasi.
Yes.
I was like, I'm not coming back to get you, baby. I plan my schedule around your schedule, and it's in the middle of nowhere. So there was a whole lot of days she just sat on the bench waiting for her mother to go. But these are the types of barriers that we have to address. And so there wasn't a lot of thought that went into, okay, now how do we do this? How do we gather this information? One of the other things that I have found with all my work with veterans is there is just a level of humility that goes, no one wants to announce when they are at the lowest point of their life and having to seek benefits that they have served this country, which, first of all, the fact that they have to seek benefits having served this country is egregious. But there are so many veterans who my office has connected with who don't have their paperwork or don't have their files, and they just need help. Like, if you just get your paperwork in order, you can get your VA benefits. But the idea of having to ask for that help is just debilitating. And so even though the legislation should technically expand to these groups, I don't know that they're going to access it in the way that we think they are, because the barriers are too numerous. There's so many people, my staff on a daily basis, apparently there was a fire in the records room at the Veterans Administration years ago, and you don't know how many people. The answer was like, we just don't have your records. I was like, well, okay, so who does have them? Like, there are so many people who just got stalled at a wall because the records were not available to prove their service, or what their level of disability is, or their rating. The other thing that I've seen is you have people who get benefits from somewhere else. They get their VA benefits, or they work and then they hit this benefit cliff because they're $5 over. So if you're helping someone to stabilize and they're doing everything they can, they're going to school, they're working, they're doing all these things, they finally get to a point where they're stable and they get 5 more hours or a promotion, then they lose all their benefits and they're right back in the same position. So it doesn't help. And my colleagues are always, every day they quote the Bible, every day.
Well, which part?
Jesus wants people to be all these things. All the poor will always be among us. I said, all you need to know is Matthew. When I was hungry, you fed me. Thank you. That, like, I'm done. Like, you can't have it both ways. And they, like, literally, they think that the answer to these problems is for community partners to step up, for churches, for organizations, really to just take it out of the federal government's hand and everything, which is the craziest thing I've ever heard. We had a witness who said, we have 200 volunteers, people come every week, and I was like, you're talking about a very different community.
Mhm.
You're talking about a very different community, but you cannot think that this is all going to be just predicated on donations and community support and assistance. This is federally mandated funds. SNAP is mandatory spending.
And by the way, we barely scratched the surface as a food bank. I know in the prior administration, one of the cabinet secretaries, Secretary Ross, had insinuated that, well, you know, if we were SNAP were to go away, people would just rely more on food banks. The reality is that for every meal that we're able to provide at a food bank, and there are many wonderful food banks across the country, SNAP is able to provide 10. So the response to Secretary Ross's argument was, even if you took all the food in all the food banks and all the food pantries in the entire United States, you wouldn't have a fraction of what SNAP is able to provide. SNAP is the first line of defense.
It's the largest anti-hunger and the most effective anti-hunger program that we have in this country. And for every dollar that is spent, I think $1.45 goes back into the community because our grocers, our vendors, local communities depend on them. But also,
It is dignity.
and that's what I was going to say. And also, that's the part I was just going to say. The idea that if you have to rely on benefits, that you don't have the ability to choose your own food, that you won't make smart choices. If you, I mean, I grew up in Waterbury. We have literally the ShopRite that just closed and that I'm still recovering from because I really can't make my peace with this. But every ethnic community in the city had an aisle in that store. And you could, my grandmother taught all of us how to cook, you know, everything. You know, you go down, we have a large Jewish population in the city of Waterbury, and all of the spices that they used to, literally the idea that you are cooking with your family, you are teaching your kids, like it was like a rite of passage in our house to learn how to make macaroni and cheese and collard greens. Like every one of my cousins know how to make this because this is what we did with my grandmother. So the idea that just because you rely on assistance, because you literally are going through experiencing some struggle, that you don't get to choose the food. I mean, we've had hearings about you shouldn't be able to buy a birthday cake or a soda
For your child's birthday.
for your child. Like we've had hearings where one of the witnesses last week was there needs to be dietary guidelines and regulations on what you can. And that was one of my concerns when we were. I was very happy in the pandemic. We were trying to do whatever we could, but with the Farmers to Families food boxes, because everyone was, I mean, forget the amount of waste, fraud, and abuse that went on with that program and contracts that we couldn't even track. But just highlighting the fact that now people will have to eat healthy. And it's like, what makes you think that people aren't already eating healthy? And what I don't want us to do is go back to a time. I remember as a little girl growing up when everybody would get government cheese and powdered milk and the cereal in the white box with the black letters. I was like, these are not Fruit Loops.
And not healthy choices.
Not have to choices. And
Like
the
you
stigma
can,
will
and
increase.
exactly, and those are some of the things that I think we can do in this farm bill. One of the ideas that I have is just the idea that everybody gets benefits on one day. You know, the grocery store is packed. They run out of everything after 2 hours. It's like, why isn't it spread out so that people can just go to the store? Like, because you know, if you go in the store on the first of the month, it's busy. People are kind of trying to pick out which families are using EBT benefits, and it shouldn't matter. And it shouldn't be, when we talk about destigmatizing these programs, we need to just integrate them into everything.
Hi. Hi, everyone. My name's Jessica Vargas. I'm the network rep for Britain, Waterbury, and Meriden. I've had the opportunity to sit in a few listening sessions. I just had one yesterday in Waterbury, and you and your colleague just mentioned a lot of things that I heard yesterday. I have been hearing immigration, undocumented, people being afraid, not knowing where to go. Lack of information is not getting to the most needed people for many different reasons. I've heard through several of them, illiteracy. We pass out information assuming that they know how to read, that they know where to go, they know how to get food. One of the things that I've been encountering as I'm boots on the ground, I'm everywhere. I'm visiting everyone because I want to hear the people. I want to know what they're lacking, what they're not lacking. But the inner cities, they need more support. I'm thankful for HRA. That's a community action agency. They service a lot. But when it comes to like Waterbury, even New Britain, we have these programs, nonprofit programs that need more money. They need more money so that we can support them. The budget was just slightly increased for nonprofits. I think I heard that.
A pathetic 2.5%. No, point to me, a pathetic 2.5%.
Yeah, don't get excited.
So, as I keep hearing from the partners that I get, the lines are getting longer. How are we going to support these programs that our communities are depending on?
Well, and this is clearly not political, keep electing people who get it. Because one of the things that we were able to do during the pandemic, and we started talking about, USDA actually got a marketing budget because it was like, it doesn't matter if we are doing all these things if people don't know about it. So they literally ran ad campaigns. They sent people, if you remember at the beginning of the pandemic, I'm so excited about this because it was one of the things that I was like jumping up and down and saying we have to do this differently. You can't say we're going to send food assistance to Connecticut and it's only available at Rentschler Field. The people in my community can't get to Rentschler Field, so we partnered with churches and local organizations, and you remember every church parking lot was handing out food through the federal government. So we really changed the way our community partners were. Making sure that people had, if you're saying to someone part of your application requires you to have an email address and they don't have an email address, it doesn't matter, but then they can't get an in-person meeting for 3 months, you're not helping people. So making sure that we have translators on the ground, that we have trusted community partners who know where the need is, who are reaching out to people proactively and saying, talk to me about your situation and let me put you in touch with the people that can help you. There are a few churches in my district that got community partnership grants for everything from healthcare and vaccination sites to food distribution sites, which is completely different than the way the U.S. government generally administers programs. And I think we have to do more of that. Minnesota has a program where they just opened this portal that cut down the application time to like 13 minutes, beginning to end, to put all your information in and then get connected with a social worker. We have to start, you cannot assume that everybody is operating starting at the same place. So if a person doesn't have that was one of the things when people were saying, why are you fighting so hard for libraries? People don't need libraries, like that's a luxury. And I was like, if you're saying the only way to get a vaccine, I took arrows on that one. The only way to get a vaccine was to go online and register.
Yeah.
And you're telling me that we're not gonna keep the public library that has a computer open? You have to have people who are looking at these things through a very different lens. So one of the things that I am hoping for, that as we are allocating funding, that we are also partnering that funding with how are we going to get to the community. We cannot expect for people to always come to us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You cannot expect for, we're setting up a table, we have office hours here, and you come to us. You have to go out to where people are. And you have to make sure that the people that they trust have the information, or at least have access to the information, so that they can connect people to what they need. One of the things that, and my staff can tell you, people call my office all the time, and it's a struggle for me because I was a civics teacher, and I was like, that's not federal. everything from a mailbox to there's a pothole
Snow
to
removal.
everything, all the things. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. I tell my staff it doesn't matter. You will never say to a person that's not federal. You will figure out what it is they need and connect them, hand them off to the person that can do this. We saw this with the Labor Department during the pandemic, the IRS with the child tax credit, like all of these things where, like, I'm like, people really think that's me? Like, all the things, and it's not me, but guess what? I know who it is. And I don't say just give them a number. I put them on hold, call the state office or the local municipality, get the person that they need to talk to, connect these two people, and then check back to make sure that it was followed up on. And I can tell you it's one of the things I'm most proud of, because there are people who call my office who live in public housing, and I'm like, wait, that's me? Like, I had that same issue. I could have called me, like, or I could have called my congresswoman. Like, there are so many things, and people just don't know who the person is. You know, and I figured that out quickly. My first month in office, we had the same people would call who knew their way around the federal government. They knew what my job was and was going to make sure I did it. And I was like, the same 40 people keep calling? We need to make sure that other people know that we can help them do this. I see it with passports, with immigration cases. People call and they're like, how much is it going to cost for you to? It costs nothing. That's literally my job. So making sure that people know where to get the information. So part of the work that I want to see in this next Farm Bill is not just allocating funding for program, but education that is coupled with this funding to make sure that these programs are implemented with fidelity, they reach the most people and have the highest impact. And I know that we can do it because we've already done it. And I was very excited that there was an ad campaign that went along with USDA funding and HHS funding during the pandemic.
Hi, Johanna.
Hi.
Good to see you again.
Good to
Melanie
see you.
from Friendship Center.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your support of our programs. We run probably the largest community meals program in the community here in New Britain. We serve over 100 people a day, Monday through Friday, through our community meals program, through our wonderful partnership with Foodshare, and a little bit of public funding, but mostly through the philanthropy and generosity of our community churches, community members, and private business owners in the city and surrounding the city who are generous enough to donate things to us. I think one of the pieces that you just alluded to that I wanted to mention in this space that I hope we could get some service dollars incorporated into this bill to do some engagement. I think one of the pieces that we're missing in these interactions is actually talking to the people who are experiencing food insecurity to figure out what their situation is, what benefits they have, what they might need, and how to get them to that place. We need more engagement with our community. I think simply serving a meal to them is not enough. It doesn't get to the root of the problem. It doesn't help us with a long-term sustainability solution for that family, because while we all want to believe that, you know, just feeding the people is great, I think feeding the people and teaching them how to feed themselves is even better. And we don't have those opportunities in a 2-second interaction when we're handing it out, because we don't have the staffing support with the qualifications to have those kinds of conversations, because our meals program is run majority with volunteers. And we need professionally trained staff who can engage with human beings on a real level and have some training on how to have those conversations and get folks to where they need to be, and that actually be able to follow up with those individuals to make sure that they have what they need, so this isn't an ongoing need forever for them.
Great.
And I think that's one of the pieces that our meals programs are missing, is an engagement piece, and there's no funding to apply for to get that. So if we could have that, and I think we've all heard the expression, no farms, no food, right? And so what I've seen over the last couple decades is the systematic dismantling of our agricultural system in this country in favor of importing fruits and vegetables at a very high cost to our citizens. So I would love to see some work around increasing agriculture and holding private entities who are developing otherwise zoned farmland for commercial interests, and have a little bit more regulation around some of that stuff so that we can keep our farms intact. Farmers don't become farmers to get rich, certainly, and they can't sustain their businesses if they don't have somebody to sell their food to, because we're importing the same thing that they farm from China. So I just wanted to
Well, two things.
bring that up.
Well, three things. First of all, you're speaking to my heart because I know all of this, but that's one of the things. So another thing that I want to see in this farm bill is BOAG education and access to capital for small and new beginning and minority farmers, because you have all these people who are entering this space but literally don't have access to land, don't have access to capital, don't know how to navigate even the grant process through the USDA. So oftentimes these portals open and the large corporate farmers or the people who have been awarded these contracts before know how to fill it out, know what words to use. 2 days later, all the money's gone. So the person who's reading through all the directions, by the time they're ready to sit down and actually do it. So making sure that we have agents on the ground that can help people, that's one thing. But also introducing young people to farming a lot earlier. We have Yukon Extension, we have Chappaqua Valley, we have a couple agricultural extension programs, and they all have waiting lists. So young people are interested. People are interested in farming as a vocation, as a field. The other thing is to be creative in what we're doing. One of the things that I'm really proud of, actually we just had an event a couple days ago in Waterbury where a brownfield site, a former factory, is now being used as a Brass City food hub site. We've seen fisheries that are going in what used to be abandoned factories. So really urban gardens, really being creative about reimagining these spaces. And then I have a scratch cooked foods meal to partner these farmers with local school districts or hospitals or different communities so that they have an easily accessible market for all of these things. Because one of the other things, it's like, well, we can't afford to refrigerate all this stuff, we can't hold it for too long, we can't transport it. So it has to be, the access to markets has to be right there. The other thing, and it goes back to what Dan said, there's no communication between these agencies. Because if there is a social worker who's at the clinic for open community hours from 3 to 5 and nobody's coming, but you have 200 people in line at the Friendship Center, why aren't we taking this person and moving them to where the people are? Right. So really looking differently at the way we engage resources. And then finally I'll say, you talk about the number of people that you guys serve at the Friendship Center, and I've been there on more than one occasion and seen this. And one of the things I love most about it is you would think you were in a 5-star restaurant. The chef literally puts everything. I don't care what he has. If it's carrots, he's chopping them and glazing them and making sure. It's like they take whatever they get and turn it into a meal. So it's not just feeding people for the sake of feeding people. It's the whole experience of sitting down and literally they walk out and they serve people. It warms your heart to see the care and attention that, and the people come and they're sitting outside, there's like a patio. It really is very different than any food bank experience that I've been to, because it's not trying to get people and move them out as quickly as possible. It's sitting, asking people to sit down, making sure they're enjoying it, asking, do you need anything else? Would you like more? Let me hold the baby till you get to the table. It just is a very different experience. And the chef over there is amazing, amazing. I went in one day, I was like, what is that I smell? He's like, oh, it's Caribbean Day. He had like jerk chicken and stew beef. I was like, what? all these, and it was literally, he says, I just look and see what we have, whatever we get that's donated, and I say, okay, what can I make with this? But it's not, there's no disregard for the people who are visiting the program. So all of these things and that's what I mean when I say this has to be a different farm bill, because we have to have different conversations about not just making sure we are having these programs, but looking to see where we can improve them. Maybe there are places where we could cut fat and say, this hasn't really worked, so let's try a different approach. Maybe we can have some pilot programs in different areas to see, does this work better to more specifically meet the needs of the people in this community. You know, it's not lost on me. I don't want anyone to think that I believe that members of Congress have this open checkbook and we can fund every program that I imagine in my head, because I can't even afford the things that, I get it. But again, our budgets are statements of our values, and there are things that I think we all agree on, and if we just, there may be programs that have historically not worked well or as efficiently as they could, but it doesn't mean that we disregard the need or scrap the programs. It means we go back to the table and revisit them and say, what do we need to do to make this better?
And can I add one thing to that? Nutrition is associated with health. If we feed people correctly, then we will save healthcare dollars, and that's all I would like to say.
That's a proven fact, Melody.
Correct.
That's actually, it's a proven, that's a.
So let's hit the Republican.
Oh, trust me, but you know what the thing is, facts don't matter. I remember at the beginning, and I say this because I've been I've had to get a gut check on so many. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic when I was the one who introduced racism as a public health crisis in Congress, and everybody thought it was just because I was black and I only wanted to talk about race, and I was like, no, it's because my district right now has the most COVID deaths of anywhere in Connecticut. Waterbury at the time was leading. And I remember my colleagues saying, do you know anyone who even personally know anyone? I was like, actually, I know 19 people. Yeah. I know 4 people from church. This was very early on, and I was like, this is crazy. And when we looked at the data, it was people who had comorbidities, high blood pressure, diabetes, asthma, based on where they lived, based on their diets, all of these things. And I was like, wait, the data is now saying that this is a problem. And I recently, the AP just did, they published CDC data that said just literally from birth to death, how black communities were affected structurally by environmental factors. Highest maternal mortality, highest number of children who had asthma and childhood diabetes, highest number of blood pressure, hypertension, all of these things, and highest number of early onset dementia. So literally from birth to death, all of these environmental factors were affecting people's outcomes, and these are all things that we can change with little things like diet, with environmental factors. And you can't just say I'm uncomfortable with having a conversation about race when this is the core of many of the conversations that we're talking about. Take race out of it though. How about we just say we're going to feed everybody? I'm good with that too.
Everybody's everybody.
I'm good with that too, but it has been a huge issue. We saw when we tried to give help to farmers during the pandemic, what we saw was minority farmers and women, literally we had to do a set aside for them because they had been cut out of this whole equation. And nobody wants to keep having this conversation over and over and over again, but if we're not willing to have this conversation, then we're not willing to correct it and make the necessary changes.
Correct.
So I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't put a plug in here for something that you talked about pilots, and something that you and Secretary Vilsack and the Biden administration have piloted over the last couple of years is the LFPA program. And I think Commissioner Herbert would kick me if I didn't say this, and Scott Kemp, our Chief Operating Officer at Connecticut Foodshare, is down there, and they know this intimately. It's an incredible program that, to your point, Melanie, has infused millions of dollars into our farmers that otherwise might not be getting subsidies. But it also has produced, Scott, about 1 million pounds.
Yeah, close to 1 million pounds.
That go directly to
I
our
think we
agencies.
talked about it one Labor Day, and she described it as very, very intentional. I mean,
Yeah.
we went, we talked to farmers, all farmers, about this program, like what they would like. Previously, we probably had skipped over smaller farmers, and we figured out a way we can go straight from that farm to the pantry, right? So what does that mean? People are getting more nutritious foods, they're getting culturally connected foods, there's less energy, there's all these just benefits of the program that are just amazing. And I mean, I would say my ask for this is We just need more of it.
Yeah.
You know, it's just scratching the surface. When we started it, people said, oh, there's not enough produce in Connecticut. People also said, hey, there's not enough black farmers in Connecticut. There are, okay, and we found them. But we need more money to make this thing even more.
How many
impressive.
BIPOC
And
farmers, Scott?
What's that?
How many BIPOC farmers?
It's like 12 out of 38, you know, that we've used.
Yeah.
So, you know, and it's established credit with those farmers, right? So now they can go and we've got a thriving community of farmers in Connecticut. I mean, we don't even say large, small, we say emerging, and we say established, right? So, we love the program, we're happy for the money. The only ask is, let's make it bigger. We need more-
You're
we need more
absolutely
of it.
right, and one of the other programs that I want to expand is GusSNP, that doubles SNAP dollars when you deal with local vendors
Yep.
and our farmers markets. One of the things that I found when we talk about BIPOC farmers in Connecticut, you're right, there are so many, and you can't, if you're inviting people to the table, then you have to listen to what they're saying and value their input. You can't invite people just to be in the room and as a part of the picture, but whenever we do anything with ag, I am very intentional, and that's the word I use, of making sure that every farmer at every level has this information. You know, whenever the first year, whenever I had a farming question, my staff would, the two resources they gave me were the same two farmers, and I was like, there's got to be more than two.
So that brings me to a great
Yeah,
question.
so-
How would this bill affect our Connecticut farmers? How would this impact us? Would it be beneficial? What are the downfalls of this bill for Connecticut farmers?
Can I just take like a couple swings of that? Well, first I want to make sure that, I don't think anybody's here because of wallflowers. We've heard from a few people, but I want to make sure more people get into the conversation. But I do want to point out what Scott was saying. LFPA, not only did it connect farmers with pantries, it created stability and profitability for Connecticut farmers, because they knew they could sell. And so, and they knew that Foodshare would purchase. Farm to school, same thing. SNAP doubling, same thing. We're creating markets that are guaranteed for these vendors. Farming is hard work. I don't think anybody doubts that. Just try to grow your own garden for the summer, and you'll find yourself at the grocery store or the farmer's market buying all that produce. Right? I mean, everybo's done that. I do it myself.
The bunnies eat all
Everybody eats everything except for the people who plant it. But the reality is that if we want to attract new people into agriculture, if we want to diversify who's entering agriculture, we've got to demonstrate that there's profit in there, there's a career in there, there's an opportunity in there, and use our public dollars, as you mentioned a couple times, Congresswoman. Our budget is our priorities, right? That is the direct connection. Use our public dollars to make that direct connection and support those small farmers. Because small farmers will grow into medium and big size farmers. But they can't if they die as small farmers, and they have to exit agriculture as an industry within their first 10 years because they need a real job. They need, health care or, two incomes earned in the household. We need to support them through that process. One of the things that we've done to undertake this, because as you mentioned, Congressman, we need to not only invite people to the table, but listen and use that opportunity. You guys are all friends here, so don't share this with anybody else. Live streaming, turn off. On Monday, we're releasing our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Working Group report for Connecticut agriculture. So, and that was actually my copy, but I think it's going to go to
Scott, you're in there. You're right in there on page 3. Look at that.
And Jahana, right?
These are all my friends.
Yeah.
Mine too. And thank you, Scott, for participating in it. But what we learned through that process is that the same things that small farmers need are the same things that BIPOC farmers need. That they need stability, they need markets, they need opportunities. And if we can use public dollars to invest on the front end of their businesses, we will help them throughout their entire career process. So Monday afternoon, you should have an invite from USDA by now in your inbox. We'll be releasing this in addition to talking about LFPA. But it's one of the ways that we've been thinking creatively in state to address some of the challenges that we know exist. And I just want to thank Scott and the folks that volunteered their time and volunteered to come forward and share their stories with us to put together that working group report. It's really, really impressive and really thoughtful. And it is a roadmap that we're going to use as a department to do better. So I couldn't take this opportunity without acknowledging that work and plug it. And since we're going to be doing this on Monday, just everybody keep your mouth shut for the weekend.
I don't want to belabor, but this is huge. This is a big deal.
So just to keep plugging it in, for TUGASNIP, we are very proud to say that our organization is a pass-through for this program. We have over 40 markets, and a lot of our small markets consist of small farmers. With this program, this funding, we're able to allow them to keep producing and growing, but also keeping them financially stable. So, programs like this are great, but there's still something that needs to be fixed within the system. The GUSNIP program allows it, but we still have to do a lot of in-match kind. And the requirements for our tedious. We don't have enough people to support the program, to carry the program. So finding funding and making adjustments in the bill will help us not only just provide for 40 markets and allow these farmers to grow, but even expand it across Connecticut, maybe to 80, 120, every year increase that.
Well, I'm not overselling my role in the Farm Bill, but part of it is having people from when I first got on this committee, the majority of my colleagues were Midwestern farmers who represented the breadbasket of our country. When we were having conversations about dairy farms, I'm fighting for someone who has 13 cows, and they're like, we have 60,000 on our farm. Like, I'm fighting for someone who has an 11-acre farm, and they're 800 acres. So it was just a very different, it was mostly large corporate farmers, a lot of trade. We had more conversations about soybeans and whole milk than anyone should ever have in a lifetime. And I'm like, well, what about my greenhouses? So really having a farm bill, and I think this is one of the things that I have really doubled down on, that meets the needs of all farmers, new and emerging farmers, BIPOC farmers, large corporate farmers, all of these people who feed our countries, who feed our communities, because the fact that my colleagues were saying, well, Connecticut's not a farming community, I'm like, it absolutely is. It absolutely is, so really having a farm bill that meets the needs of all farmers and all communities, I think, is super important to me, making sure that our greenhouse growers have the support that they need. The number one industry in Connecticut 5, which I did not know until I became a member of Congress, is greenhouses.
New facts.
Greenhouses. We supply all of the beautiful plants that you get in Home Depot and Lowe's are grown, most of them all over from this district. Cheshire, you go up, like the number one issue more than anything else, everyone thinks it's insurance, it's all these things, greenhouses. So we're here. We're here, and I want to make sure that even those smaller family farms are represented in the Farm Bill, because the other thing that I hear is it's such a weird dynamic, because you have generational farmers who now their kids have gone off to college, and it's like, okay, so what happens to the farm in the next generation if your children don't want to farm? So making sure that they can hire people, that they can keep the farm growing. A bad farming season means something very different to people in Connecticut than it does to people in Wisconsin or, Nebraska. They rotate crops, they go to another field, they do all these things, but once you're wiped out in Connecticut, for many families, they don't recover. So access to capital, making sure small farmers are included. That's what is at stake for Connecticut.
Yes.
Making sure that we have a farm bill that says, even if you only have 13 cows in 1 acre, you still belong in this bill.
I wanted to just give an opportunity for some of our students who might have a question or two.
My name is Lily Mercado. I'm a rising senior, and I'm founder and president of the Intersectional Justice Coalition here at CCSU. First off, this has been a great conversation so far. I'm really looking forward to putting some of the points of action or engagement in education in my hands, just on a small scale with my club. And I think that could be very helpful for the community. But I'm very glad you're here. I'm very glad that you are here knowing all of these things that we're talking about, very passionate about the subject. But as you know, like, you are one congresswoman in the United States. Earlier you were talking about how bipartisanism is not enough. We could be bipartisan and, make a compromise, but it might not be enough. It does not cover what we need to feed people. It is a compromise. So my question for you, essentially, is how do we push legislators, and even on a smaller scale, state legislators, communities, to support basic needs without all the excuses?
Vote. My students used to ask me all the time, because I taught civics, and whenever we covered an election, in every election debate, election platform, whether it's president or whatever, Medicare, Social Security is always on their list of priorities. And my kids would ask me, why? I said, because what's your grandma do on election day? She votes. It's like a big deal. Gets up, gets dressed, goes early, votes, goes out for coffee afterwards. They make a day of it. And I said, and that is a constituency that votes. There's a reason why there was so much pushback to student loan forgiveness, because it's a constituency that people are like, well, I don't know, you can help them, you can not help them, they're not going to vote anyway. So the way that I remind people all the time, I just left the senior center in Farmington, and this guy opened the door and someone said, do you work for her? I said, actually, no, I work for him. And that's how it has to be. Like, you cannot ever let a legislator get complacent as if your vote is a given. If this is something that you care about, the way that you know what I care about is how I voted on it. It doesn't matter how many interviews I do, how many floor speeches I do. At the point where legislation comes to the floor, the way that you know where I stand on a piece of legislation is the way that I vote. So, to your point, as more people who care about these issues, you hear people talk about, I'm a single issue voter, this is the thing I care about, whether it be women's reproductive health or LGBTQ rights or all of these things. The people who care deeply about those things engage on those issues. So for the people, there's a community for everybody. For the community who really understands about food security and understands the impact of cutting these programs, to public sentiment is everything. With it, you can do anything. Without it, you can't do anything. You can do nothing. You know what I mean? So if the people in this district care about these things, and they have a representative, whether in Congress or the state level, who is disregarding the things that they care about and voting differently, then you need to find someone else. At the point where I, as the congresswoman of this district, is not meeting the needs of the people of this, they need to find someone else. Like, I wouldn't vote for me. And that's not political at all. It is just basic civics and government. Like, you find the person, we have a representative democracy, so you find the person who represents the things that you care about, and you support them so that they can continue in that work. And at the point where that person is no longer fighting as hard as you need them to, then you need to find another champion. Or step up to the plate and do it yourself, I don't know. But that's what we need to do. So literally changing the conversation by making sure that the people who are at the tables and engaging in these conversations are doing that. And I'll tell you a perfect example of that. SNAP and food security wasn't the only thing that was on the table. Veterans benefits and Social Security were also on the table. And there was such a public outcry that at the State of the Union, it was like, we don't want to cut Social Security. It was like, wait, what just happened? It was crazy. I was like, what just happened? Because the public was like, you are not going to get away with doing this. So it has to be this idea where the public doesn't allow it to happen. Because when you talk about me being one of only 435, you are absolutely right. But I can tell you, no matter where I am in Congress, I will always be in the minority when it comes to the American people. You outnumber us all day long. There's 300 million of you. There's only 435 of us. So if people really used their voices and said, this is what we demand coming out of this next farm bill, coming out of this next appropriations package, coming out of this next education budget, it really is, it's not even Pollyannish, it's intentional. That's how the Constitution was written, where the people have a representative you are in student government, I tell people, if nobody votes and I vote for myself, guess what? I win. So that's how you keep doing exactly what you're doing. You show up in spaces like this. You let people know that this is important to you. You let people know that young people do vote and they do care about the issues and they are engaged. And you will inherit all of these issues and have to be a part of the solution. So do not let legislators, policymakers take you for granted, take the value that students and your generation bring to these conversations, you know, and weigh in and let people know we're watching and we're paying attention and we're also old enough to vote.
And come take my American government class on Monday nights in the fall next door. We'll get 15 weeks of that because that was great. Every American should actually have to watch a video of the last 3 minutes. Well, we have a video.
But yeah, no, that is, I love that because I remind people, you make yourself, nuisance isn't even the right word, but you make people pay attention to you, and that's how people pay attention to you. If young people voted overwhelmingly in the last election, we wouldn't even be debating student loan debt forgiveness. Because people would know, wait, they outside, they coming back to the polls. Like we have to watch. So you're doing it. You're doing it. And you said something when you were talking, you said, on a very small scale, I'm doing, that's what it's about. Everybody doing what they're able to do. The way I can weigh in on these issues is going to be very different than the way you weigh in, but all of those things are equally as important. So if I'm holding down my corner of the vineyard in DC and you are on a college campus, you know, working with your groups and amplifying this message and sharing it on your social media, whatever, it's all of these things coming together. That's how we do this work. It's not you elect someone and you send them off to Washington and say, now fix it, and I'll see you in 2 years. It's you elect someone and you pay attention to what they're doing and you make sure they're doing what they said they were going to do, and you hold them accountable.
Thank you.
I hope you'll vote for me. Like, I might have just talked her out of voting for me.
With the opposite effect. One question?
Yes, my name is Ryan Jones. I'm also a student at Central Connecticut State University. I'm a political science major, but I'm also your intern as well. My question is basically, the answer was to vote, but how do we address the issues within inner city communities? I come from New Haven. We have a lot of systemic issues as far as housing insecurity, food insecurity. People are starving, crime, drugs, et cetera, et cetera. And those have been going on for decades and years and all. So it's a lot of voters fatigue. It's a lot of people who feel as though voting is not changing anything or the politicians don't care about them. So how do we how do we increase the hope within the people and turn it back into the communities, especially inner city communities and people, Black and brown communities, who feel as though that they're forgotten?
My answer remains the same, Ryan. You vote, because you cannot, and I get it, like there are different ways to address it and people weigh in differently. Activists have a role in this, but legislators also have a role. You can't stand outside of the, in the parking lot screaming through the window saying you need to do this. Someone needs to be at the table. Someone needs to be in the room. Someone needs to be a part of the group that is making the decisions. And I get it, people have voter fatigue, and there is something, you look for the silver lining in everything, if you will, After the last cycle, and again, this is not political, but I'm using it in the context of helping you to understand a story. My last election was very close. And for me, I prayed about it. I said, Lord, what is the blessing in this? And it is that people realize that this cannot be taken for granted, that one vote matters, that 1,851 votes matter. And sometimes you get to the point where it doesn't matter, there's too many people, Connecticut in the whole scheme of things isn't gonna change the dynamic. One vote matters. We have, what's his name? One vote. He won by one vote.
Yep.
One vote. And literally, I just imagine him. If I were him, everybody I walked up to, they're like, I voted for you. You must have been the one. You tried Chris Poulos at the state rep. One vote, 3 recounts. So you can't tell me that it doesn't matter. So if someone like you from New Haven is saying, this is important enough to me that I'm going to be in these rooms and in these spaces, and I'm going to make sure that before you leave, you hear the experiences of my community, And not only that you hear them, but you address them. You use it to guide your decision making. Like, there's a reason why the Connecticut Department of Agriculture has a DEI plan for improvement moving forward. They didn't just one day wake up and say, you know what, guys, I got a good idea, let's do this. It's because there was some outside mobilization and people saying, you got to do better on this. So my answer is the same. Like, but you can't be surprised, I'm a civics teacher. Right?
The House itself there's only a 5-vote majority.
Yes.
In
Yes,
435
Yes.
votes. I mean, you know.
Hi, Congresswoman. My name is Matthew Dillon. I'm an attorney with Legal Aid in Waterbury. And thank you for this opportunity today. Yeah, I think the piggyback on what the folks have said earlier, the pandemic has really exposed how fragile the safety net is, especially with the loss of the emergency allotment benefits. And pre-pandemic and even now, clients come to me to say, I think my food stamp benefits are too low. Can you take a look? And I tell folks, food stamps is a legal issue. So when people come to me, I'll break out my pencil and my worksheet and I'll do the math and I'll help them out with it. And one of the things I keep talking to them about is ways to maximize their SNAP by using the deductions that are already built in. Are there any plans or potential for the Farm Bill to expand or streamline the current deductions that are in place now?
So, couple things. So, my colleagues will argue that it's a supplemental. It's not meant to purchase all of your food. So it's supposed to supplement the family's regular food bill. But one of the challenges is the way income and assets are calculated. We see this with a lot of Social Security recipients. The way if people are in a shared living situation, if they're getting benefits from somewhere else, it should not be that every time you get $1 from one place, you lose $3 from somewhere else, because you never really emerge from this place. So that is the revaluation of the Thrifty Food Plan is one of the things that it's supposed to be done automatically, and it doesn't get done, and that's where you reassess how much it costs to buy food, to prepare food, and really you're able to adjust benefits accordingly. That's one of the things. But to also make sure that assets, the way some people's assets, it shouldn't be if you own a car, now you're no longer eligible. If you need the car to get to work, it's like what came first, the chicken or the egg? So really but again, you first have to believe that the people who are on the receiving end of benefits have the dignity and deserve to get them, because otherwise you're nibbling around the edge trying to figure out ways to cut here, cut here, cut there. So these are literally the conversations that we're having. And again, it is the fact that we are forcing, to look at how different populations operate means that you recognize that we're dealing with people, not just data, not just statistics, not just numbers. So that's one of the big things that I would like to see as we look at modernizing and streamlining the program is the calculation of assets. People who may have lost a job, and we saw this with the pandemic with unemployment, compensation, different things. So you mean to tell me I have to clear out all of my savings, and sell everything I own in order to feed my kids? There's some different ways that we could look at this, and regionally, that's going to look very different. In this district, we just had this conversation, totally different story, but with my staff, we were looking at a housing trust in the northwest corner in a different part of the state, and I had to explain to my colleagues why a $160,000 house was low-income housing in this area. And they're like, how is that low-income housing? I was like, well, when every other house is $2.5 million. You have to be willing to not have these black and white blanket conversations. So reevaluating the Thrifty Food Plan, looking at how assets are calculated, and making sure that a person who receives, once their pension kicks in or their Social Security is increased, it doesn't offset and reduce their other food benefits.
Thank you.
Well, this was wonderful. I said to myself, I was like, an hour and a half, what are we going to talk about for an hour?
I think that conversation will carry on more, actually.
Well, it just, I mean, and I'm glad that you see that I am passionate about this. I really deeply care about this, and I think that doing things that the way that we've always done them can't be the only answer. We have to be willing to have different conversations and legislate differently. And again, I just appreciate the opportunity to explain to you, because whether I represent you or not, whether you live in the 5th District or not, I am a congresswoman from the state of Connecticut, and I think I owe it to the people here to know why I voted no last week. And this is why. This is why. This is my issue. This is my issue. It is the thing that I am bracing myself to fight for this Congress. It is the thing that I want to make sure that we have robust conversations and debate and dialogue, and we reach compromises that are healthy and effective and productive, but not always on the backs of the most, fragile people. And also really to change the narrative around our relationship with food. Food is health, food is medicine, food is, love, food is raising your kids, food is bringing families together, food is healing in a mental health crisis, food is all the things. All the things, and we have to stop just looking at it as sustenance and this transactional relationship. You don't feel good, someone makes you soup. There's a whole lot of things happening there. And I just think that taking that away from families based on their ability to earn is just cruel, and it's wrong, and we can do better than this. So just thank you. Thank you for your partnership. I reach out to this guy all the time. I reach out to all of you when I have questions, because a lot of this is for me, I just want to feed people, but a lot of it is complex, and there's a lot of behind the scenes things that are happening. Brian and our Connecticut Department of Agriculture has been amazing on issues of small farmers, on what their needs are, on challenges, on ways that I can be better, and I'm really optimistic. I have a collaborative heart. I want to work with my colleagues. I want to get this done, but not if it means we're feeding less people. I do have some absolutes here. I don't want the same farm bill that we've had 5 farm bills ago. I want to make sure that we are adjusting for inflation, that we are looking at our population. It's really hard to say, people always talk about the budget as you have a set amount of money in your household, and that's how much you can spend. Yeah, but if you have 5 more kids, then you need to look at your budget differently. So we're looking at our census data, we're looking at our population shifts, and looking at the needs of people and communities, and just evaluating all of those factors. And what I can tell you, for me, I don't look at food as just a USDA issue. I don't look at hunger as an issue that only belongs to this group. I look at it as, how does it affect healthcare? How does it affect education? How does it affect housing? All of the things. And if we really kind of layer our resources and work across programming, I think we can get a lot more done. But I don't know if I've convinced you that you have my commitment to continue to work on this topic. It is important. I believe in it.
I think you convinced me.
Yes. And I thank you for all of your work. Many of you are the same people that I see in different spaces on this topic, but there are some new people, and I'm just excited that people are paying attention. I'm excited. It is the life that I needed breathed back into me after last week. And the one thing I will tell you, I said that I struggled before the vote. I was up at night, I was tossing and turning, I called my pastor, and I was sick over it. But the next day when I looked in the mirror, I was like, oh my God, it was like a weight had been lifted. And I know that I did the right thing. I know that I did the right thing. So thank you.
Thank you.
So just to be respectful of everybody's time, I want to say thank you for gathering, being here, and participating in this important discussion that is not just food, it's food security, it's food resource, and it's education, and it's advocacy. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us or reach out to us. We're here for you.
Everybody can take their selfies.
Thank you.